He could not fancy dance, he could not sing. He was told that it was a sin.
Well, welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us this evening. It is 7:05, so Diane, are you going to start us off?
Absolutely, I can. So hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name is Diane Belrose, and I work for Prairie School Division as a part of the Indigenous education team. So our goal for this evening is to shed a little bit of light on the history of Indian residential schools in Canada. We're really discovering through conversations in our community that a lot of people they have limited knowledge, I'll say, and they actually have some strong beliefs and some misconceptions. So we're hoping by having this evening that we can give everybody a bit of a deeper understanding that will allow for some really good conversations to happen, and hopefully we can all come together and answer some questions, and like I said, share some light. So I'm going to turn it over to the coaches to introduce themselves. Cor, you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Diane. Tanse kakyo, Corina Tsikasun, Iguamachachoesis. So I said, hello, everyone. My name is Corrine, and I am from Gift Lake. So I've been part of the Indigenous education team for the past, this is the 6th year, crazy. And I serve High Prairie Elementary and EW Pratt are my 2 schools. And this part of the presentation, you'll hear me present the resources is the area I built. Thank you.
Connie, go next.
Ansakakyal, Connie Sabo, Nitsikasun. I am from Peavine Métis Settlement, and I will be on the section of the Allyship. And myself, I serve the Donnelly School, the George P. Vanier School. In Falher, I serve the École Routier School. In Slave Lake, I serve the C.J. Schurter School, and I co-serve the High Prairie Elementary School with CORE. Thank you.
Tanse Jamie Shelfu Nitsigasun, Greward, Alberta, Virginia. My name is Jamie Shelfu from Greward, Alberta, and happy to be here, part of the Indigenous education team for, I think, 3 years now or so. I serve schools of Jussard School, the Prairie River Junior High, and the PVO Outreach in High Prairie. And I just wanted to, I guess, thank everyone for being here today. And we wanted to start with a prayer. Unfortunately, the elder we requested could not make it at this time. He was already committed somewhere else. So in light of that, I guess I will do an opening prayer just to start us off in a good way. If you probably can't see, my smudge is going here, not very well, but it's going. Mama Witawimo, Creator, we thank you for another day on Mother Earth. We give thanks for the many gifts and blessings you provide for us. We give thanks for our health. We give thanks for our family. I thank you for the roof over my head, the food on my table, and the sacred water that strengthens and keeps us going. I ask you, Creator, watch over, keep us all safe today. And I also ask for forgiveness as I say this prayer, not in my native tongue. I'm saying it in English as I'm still learning my language. And yeah, I thank you for bringing everyone together. I hope we can come together with open hearts and open minds. And I thank you for guiding us in this work. Hi, can I ask them? And ask them one. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us once again, giving up part of your evening. I suppose we should start with our slides. Are we set for that, Diane? So just let me change my view a little bit here. For some reason, I can't get rid of. There we go. So, High Prairie School Division would like to acknowledge we're meeting today within the ancestral traditional territory of the Indigenous people of this area. This land is and will continue to be home to the Cree, the Dene, Métis, and other First Nations residing within the boundaries of Treaty 8. We acknowledge the elders and knowledge holders that are still with us today and those that have gone before us. We would also like to acknowledge this land is home to the four-legged, the two-legged, the flying, the crawling, the swimming, the plant and rock beings. We share this land with many others and must walk carefully to be mindful of the impacts we have on those we share the land, air, and sacred water with. It is a privilege and an honor to live, learn, work, play, and grow on Treaty 8 territory. Hi, hi. So I guess with the recent discovery of 215 children discovered at Kamloops Indian Residential Schools, we wanted to take some time to educate those who may not know much about residential schools, who may have questions. We've had questions asked such as, why did this happen? Why didn't parents remove their children from the schools? And why did the government let this happen? We wanted this session to be a safe place for people to learn. There is so much information available and many stories still to be told. We possibly cannot cover it all. We thought a strong base of understanding of the whys was a perfect starting place. We will provide resources for those who want to further their learning and understanding, along with tips for being an ally. The issue of residential schools is not about shame or blame, as those lead us nowhere. This is not an Indigenous issue, this is a Canadian issue, and we must work together to right the wrongs and move forth as a country and ensure something like this never happens again. To understand why residential schools happen, we must look at the history of colonization, the formation of Canada as a country, and the continued attempts by the Church, Crown, and government to eliminate their obligations and responsibilities and erode the rights of Indigenous peoples to land and resources. It all started in 1455. The doctrine of discovery was the international law that gave license to the explorers to claim vacant land, terra nullius, in the name of their sovereign. Vacant land was that which was not populated by Christians, and this was issued by Pope Nicholas V. And that doctrine of discovery started everything off. So jumping ahead to 1613, the Mohawk people noticed Europeans, Dutch, coming into their territory unannounced. An agreement was made as to how they were to treat each other and live together. This agreement became known as the Two-Row Wampum Belt Agreement, and that's the picture on the top left. Each of their ways would be shown in the purple rows running the length of the wampum belt. In one row is our ship of our white brothers' ways, in the other, a canoe with our ways. Each will travel down the river of life side by side. Neither will attempt to steer the other's vessel. And this was the first treaty struck between the Indigenous people of Turtle Island and newcomers to the continent. The earliest treaties that came about were peace and friendship treaties. They focused on how to peacefully coexist and laid out trade relations. With the French and the British fighting for a foothold in North America, treaties began to include military alliances with Indigenous peoples. Following the 7 Years' War, with the English defeating the French, King George issued the Royal Proclamation of 1763. This granted ownership over North America to King George. However, the Royal Proclamation explicitly states that Aboriginal title had existed and continues to exist, and that all land would be considered Aboriginal land until ceded by treaty. Moving forward, after the War of 1812 between the United States and Britain, the Crown no longer needed Indigenous people for military allies. They started to view Indigenous people as a barrier to land and resources. In 1867, Canada entered Confederation and became a country. In 1869, Britain, wary of American expansionism, sold Rupert's Land to the Dominion of Canada. That Rupert's Land is highlighted on the top right photo. It's the section in yellow. So a huge swath of land in North America. And this outraged the Métis living in the area that were working for the fuel trade. So that sale of the land and lack of representation in the government leads to the Red River and the Northwest Resistance. During this time, the buffalo is being cleared off the plains to open land for settlers and the railroad. Learning from its mistakes with the Métis, Canada enters treaty negotiations with the First Nations to ensure peaceful settlement of the West. Nations facing starvation due to the extermination of the buffalo are forced into signing treaty with provisions promised. A smallpox epidemic was another reason treaty was signed. And people signed the treaty to access the medicine clause, or they were promised access to doctors and medicine. Overall, throughout history, the Crown negotiated 11 treaties. These were the numbered treaties between 1871 and 1921. There's other treaties on the eastern side of the country, but we wanted to kind of highlight the numbered treaties as that focuses more on our area here. The treaties promise reserve lands, annuities, and the continued right to hunt and fish on unoccupied Crown lands in exchange for Aboriginal title. These treaties also held clauses for schools or teachers to educate children, and agricultural implements were promised to assist Aboriginal signatories in their transition towards an agricultural lifestyle. Aboriginal signatories were encouraged to settle on reserve lands in sedentary communities, learn agriculture, and receive an education. The leaders who signed treaty had no way of knowing the type of education the government would establish. The treaty agreements all involved the sacred pipe being lifted, and Indigenous people saw these as sacred agreements being witnessed by Creator. The elders also state that many promises that were agreed upon didn't make it into the official document. In the eyes of the federal government, the act of signing treaty brought Aboriginal people of the Northwest under the jurisdiction of the Dominion of Canada and its laws. Next slide, please. So moving forward to the Indian Act, another piece of legislation. The Indian Act was created in 1876. And with that act being created, any self-government structures Indigenous people had were extinguished. The act is much more than a body of laws that for over a century have controlled every aspect of Indian life. These laws were aimed to eliminate First Nation culture in favor of assimilation into European Canadian society. Its most recent revisions in 1951 and 1985 were made to remove discriminatory sections. I think it's important to point out that the Indian Act is the only race-based piece of legislation in the world, and it still governs First Nation people to this day. The Indian Act is a huge document with many different things, laws and being involved. So we wanted to kind of highlight just the ones that related and pertain to residential schools. So in 1884, one of the revisions, this was when attendance in residential schools became mandatory. So the question is, why did parents allow children to be taken? And the short answer is children are rounded up by priests with the RCMP and parents were forced to comply at gunpoint. Why didn't parents remove their children from the schools? Parents who removed their children were threatened with jail time of 30 days minimum. Parents would not be able to provide for the rest of their family if they were imprisoned. Due to the extermination of the buffalo, food was scarce on the plains. The Indian agent withheld rations if students were not returned to the mission. Image number 2 on this slide documents a letter to Mr. Gambler from the Indian agent stating rations would be withheld until his children were returned. And this happened at a time when people needed permission from the Indian agent to leave the reserve to hunt, fish, or see their children. Often their requests were denied. If students did not return to the mission when they were supposed to, later visitations and student holidays during Christmas and summers would be withheld. So students would go longer without reprieve of what they were experiencing at the schools. To learn more about the Indian Act, I highly suggest you read the book on the image on the far right. There's 21 Things You May Not Have Known About the Indian Act, written by Bob Joseph. It's a fabulous resource, and it's going to touch on many things in the Indian Act that we just don't have time for today. So I think with that being said, I covered quite a bit of material so far, so maybe we can pause for a few minutes for some questions and answers. If anybody has any questions, feel free to type it in the chat or unmute yourself, please. Thank you.
Or raise your hand and then we can call on you.
Wendy, if this helps at all, right now I know a lot of libraries are still offering free memberships due to COVID, and that book in specific is, you can get it online through the Libby app, and so you can borrow it for free. I agree, it's a really good book.
Awesome, thank you.
Margaret Ann, your hand is raised.
Diane, do you want to just stop sharing your screen, please?
Sorry. I just have a question about the ages of the children that were taken. My mother was in residential school from the age of 3, and that came with her settlement, or before their settlement with Truth and Reconciliation. It showed that the age that she was taken to Uville was when she was 3 years old. Now, almost everything else that we are hearing these days, and that's written these days, says from the age of 7. But that's not right. And some of the records, I have a cousin who's, who can't find any record of her death, but her family was told upon visitation that she had died. And then the door was closed on them, and they were never able to get any answers about when, why, where is she buried. So looking at the school records, there isn't any record of her ever being there either. So obviously those records got destroyed too. My biggest question is why my mother was so young, and do we know why?
I think and you are correct. Sometimes you hear the age of 7. Often it was the age of 5, and we do know some as young as 3 attended. And I think the overall reason for that would have been to boost the numbers of students within the doors. So the churches got more payment for holding the school, more funding available from the government for that. And as likewise, that's why we see in history that a lot of the Métis and the Inuit were also sent to residential school. Even though the Indian Act is not a law that governs the Métis and the Inuit, they were just used to bolster numbers in the schools.
I believe Mom was there as First Nations, but at that time, the Double Mother Act her mother was officer married to a Métis man, And so, of course, she wasn't on reserve. So I don't know how come they went and got her.
Yeah, and a similar
you.
story from all across the country. Thank you, Margaret. Are there any other questions out there?
I just have a question. Curious then, when we listen to the numbers, which I suspect to some extent are the total numbers are unknown, but did it represent like all children, or was it just in selected places that children were removed, or was it felt that every child removed?
I think often it depended on age. If you were pretty close to 16, 15, 16, then you may have been avoided, but often they did attend right up until 16. So at 15 years of age, if you were found, whereas you weren't rounded up at a younger age, you would have attended probably 2 years. And
But would there have been areas in the country where there were populations that were sort of, I hate to say it, but untouched? Or was it all Indigenous populations, no matter where they were, they hunted them out and found them, so nobody was unscathed? Did they go everywhere?
I think for the most part, it was clear across the country, although some communities got brought in at a later date just due to how hard it was to get to those areas at the time. Right? As we know, people in the far north were rounded up and flown to residential schools in the Northern Ontario areas when they were coming from Northwest territories and further north. So I do think for the most part, it was right across the country, although, you know, looking at a map of the residential schools, we see most of the residential schools were located in Western Canada. The earlier ones were started though on the eastern part of the country. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it answers it. It saddens me and disgusts me, but it does answer the question.
So that being said, that most of the residential schools were on the western side of Canada, do we know, like, is there a reason for that?
Absolutely, there was a reason for that. By the time residential schools were created and already well underway, the eastern part of the country was already settled and lands were already claimed in those areas. So they really wanted to open up Western Canada for settlers, and it's easier to do if you remove the people from the land, right? And as we get into this next section, that we'll talk a little bit on that. But in light of that, part of those treaty negotiations, those treaties were to open up the land, to make it available for settlers and to clear the land, right? So Indigenous peoples were placed on reserves, and that opened up wide swaths of land.
So does that mean that the Indigenous people that were in Eastern Canada then, where you said settlement had already happened, what, I mean, I probably learned this in history because I grew up in Montreal, but golly knows I don't remember. So what happened to those Indigenous folks that were in Eastern Canada? So if there were more Indigenous folks there, but only some of them were in residential schools, did the other ones just, were they able to live on, or did they still have their land taken, or what happened with them?
I think land was still claimed and taken through various treaties that were signed on the eastern coast, on the eastern part of the country. And absolutely, the Indigenous population did attend residential schools in those areas. And in fact, you know, some of the schools, the very first school was in Eastern Canada. So as we get on to our next portion here on history and facts of residential schools, maybe we can touch on a little bit of that. Leslie Ennis, I see you have a hand up. So before I move on, I want to give you a chance to.
Sorry, I was sneaking a snack too at the same time. A question for you, because from my understanding, I did some research with my class. I teach grade 6. So we've been focusing on this recently. And I did some research that the school started as early as 1831 with the government not getting involved with the funding until later on. I think you had mentioned about 9 years after Confederation, 1876. But this went on, as far as I know, the last residential school closing in 1996, 25 years ago. I know that because my daughter's 25. And so during that time, and you talk about them being hunted down and taken in, as we evolve over the 100 years, our society changes as well. So looking into things where we are looking at First Nations individuals becoming into relationships with Caucasian individuals. So I know with my family history or my ex-husband's, his grandmother being First Nations and the grandfather being white, she had lost her status by leaving the reserve. But I'm always curious as to whether that was the case for all of the kids, that if you weren't actually living on the reserve, would they hunt you down anywhere? Like, was it a census where was everybody accounted for and they would go looking for them?
I think a lot of times they knew the numbers, and if you left a reserve, people didn't lose their rights by leaving the reserve. They lost their rights by marrying non-Indigenous.
Right. Right. So for her children didn't have to go to residential school, and thus for my ex-husband, he didn't have to as well. I think to myself, wow, we certainly evolve as a culture in that 100 years. And I think about these schools still being opened in the 70s and the 80s. And, when I think about First Nations people moving off of the reserve and moving into towns, and that would they have still been looked for and taken away from their families even then? Because I think when a lot of people talk about them taken away from their families, we tend to go right back to the 1900s in our heads, but we have to remember this went on till 96, right? So I was just curious if they were still in order, if the kids were having to attend residential schools in the 70s and the 80s and even the 90s, whether they were coming after the kids then, coming to their homes and taking those kids, because I can't see anybody volunteering to go to residential school.
And I think during more modern times, for sure, children would be registered. They would be on the register of the band, right? So they would have a list. They would know who belonged to what bands. And then in modern times, really, you start looking at tax returns and things like that, and it gets pretty easy to track people down, and even if you're not.
They would also remove family allowance, Leslie. So that was one way of forcing the children to go. So there's other tools that they used.
Wow. Blows my mind. Okay, thank you for the input.
Jamie, you have two other questions. Did you want to finish those ones, or?
Sure, we can touch on those. I don't want to shift gears before we have a chance to share with everyone.
Maybe Keisha, if you want to go first. If you turn your camera on, I could add you to the spotlight. If you don't, then it'll just stay.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
Okay, perfect. I'm not turning on my camera because, yeah, anyways. So this question kind of is for my 8-year-old son. He's well aware that my grandmother had attended residential school along with many other people in our family and stuff like that. He has recently stated that he is in fear because he goes to a Catholic school in my hometown here, and he stated that he's now almost scared and worried because they do go to church, right? And he's concerned that what if the priests or the fathers, they want to start taking kids away? So how would you explain to or educate a child who is completely a bit oblivious to the topic without getting too detailed? Like, mind you, he does have a little bit of understanding, but keeping it age appropriate and kind of helping out his fear a little bit.
I think I would maybe look at some of the resources we're going to highlight later. We got a bunch of children books that are available out there. So that's probably where I would start to give them a little more background knowledge. And then, you know, just explain how since 1996, at least, things have changed a lot. And a lot of those residential schools that were still in operation were turned over to band or nations to be run. And the first one in example of that was Blue Quill. So they turned their residential school into a college for their own people that was run by them. So, you know, just start to have those conversations, and maybe that might alleviate some of his fears.
Keisha, we have a great video at the end of the presentation for parents that you will enjoy. Well, not enjoy, but you know what I mean. It'll be helpful.
Was there one other question?
Someone named Alice has their hand up. I don't know if you can see that.
Alice, please go ahead if you're ready.
Hi there. I only learned about residential school. I came from the Philippines and I was in Prairie since 2007. And I learned about residential school when I attended one of my seminars in Edmonton. And now I'm listening more. So kids or parents didn't have a choice. They were taken into, and you were saying about the places were funded by the government. So basically the government and the nuns and the priest were murderers together. It's I don't know. I said I wanted to, that Indian act, the book that you showed, I guess I can get more information because I want to educate myself more. When it happened, I posted, and of course, in the Philippines, when I posted, a bunch of my friends back home, they're like, what is that? What is that such thing? And it's like, so I was trying to explain it to my sister, and I said, I don't really have a lot of knowledge, but I would like to gain knowledge because there's people that I know that were in there, but some people are, you know, you're not going to go to somebody that, you know, that they attended to school and ask them because it could be a very touchy part, right? So I don't want to do that, but as much as possible, I want to educate myself to learn more about the history and like what happened, and you're listening to it every day. And like with me, I have a 7-year-old son that is very, very into it, and he's not scared that he will be taken away, but to explain that, and I'm like, oh, let's educate ourselves. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, Alice. Thanks for sharing. We do have resources later that will give you a good starting point. And, you know, the government, and not just the Catholic Church, there was many different churches that were a part of the residential school system throughout its beginning and up until its end. But I think we should move on a little bit, and at the end we'll definitely have time for more questions and answers. So if you have some burning question, please hang on to it, and at the end we'll have lots of time, I think, for that.
Yeah, we'll start with Monica when we come back after that. I also shared the link for the Indigenous Canada. It's in the chat.
Jimmy, can you see?
Screen, please, Diane.
Okay.
So the history and facts of residential school, we wanted to share a little bit. It's just a brief synopsis. I don't think we need to go into too much detail in regards to the history and stuff in this little snippet I am providing. So the origins of the residential school system can be traced to as early as 1830s, like mentioned earlier, long before Confederation of Canada as a country in 1867. Originally, the residential school system focused on industrial labor schools and farm schools. So they were more targeted to teaching Indigenous students skills where they would help farmers basically on their farms. And then by 1900, there were 22 industrial schools and 39 residential schools in Canada. In 1931, at its peak, there were 80 schools in operation. And while most of them would be called residential schools, They often maintained industrial work through large gardens, barns, workshops, and sewing rooms. 130 residential schools operated in Canada between 1831 and 1996. An estimated 150,000 children attended residential schools. Next slide, please, Wendy. Actually, can you go back, or Diane, sorry, can you just go back to that slide for a second?
This slide, Jamie?
The previous one, please. Or yeah, that's the one. Sorry, I wanted to highlight these two photos here. The one on the left is of students at Gruard, St. Bernard's Mission in Gruard. So that's one of the schools in our local area here surrounding High Prairie and within Treaty 8 boundaries. The one on the right also is, one is St. Bernard's and the other one is St. Bruno's in Jussard School, as well as St. Peter's in Slave Lake. So there's two photos on this slide and there's one photo of another school in our area on the next slide. Thank you, Diane. So there's the photos on the right of St. Bruno's and the photo on the left taken at St. Peter's Residential School in Slave Lake. So the education or hidden truth, what was the real purpose of the residential schools? And I think as we started covering some of that history of colonization and formation of Canada as a country and the changes in laws and governance, as well as the Indian Act, and then into residential schools, I think we start to get a pretty clear picture of what the real reasons were, right? And to quote Duncan Campbell Scott, Department of Indian Affairs in 1920, I want to get rid of the Indian problem. I do not think, as a matter of fact, that the country ought to continuously protect a class of people who are able to stand alone. Our objective is to continue until there is not a single Indian in Canada that has not been absorbed into the body politic, and there is no Indian question and no Indian department, and that is the whole object of this bill. So basically, the government wished to divest itself of its legal financial obligations to Indigenous people. There would be no reserves, no treaties, no Aboriginal rights. Now, if education was the intent of residential schools, the children would have never suffered the physical, sexual, and emotional abuses they endured. The church-run organizations also profited from the forced child labor and not feeding the children properly. Nutrition experiments and forced sterilizations would not have occurred. All the children would have returned home if it were about education. That is a little bit of a tough ending on my part, and that is my portion of the slides, and I thank you for all listening to that. Connie, I believe you're up.
Thank you, Jamie. I'm just going to reiterate a little bit. As you can see, on the timeline, it says that the first residential school opens in 1833, when Jamie already stated that it opened in 1831. Okay, so differing. On April 1st, 1920, Deputy Superintendent General of Indian Affairs Duncan Campbell Scott makes attendance at residential school mandatory for every First Nations child between ages 7 and 16 years of age. And we've already discussed how there's misinformation because it's much younger. On October 23rd, 1966, 12-year-old Cheney Wenjack dies after escaping from the Cecilia Jeffrey Residential School near Shoal Lake, Ontario. That following November, a coroner's inquest into Cheney Wenjack's death is held. The all-white jury finds that residential schools cause tremendous emotional and psychological problems. They recommend that a study be made of the present Indian education and philosophy. On January 1st, 1996, was the last federally operated residential school. That's when it closes. Next slide, Diane. And here is a gentleman who is considered and seen as a hero. His name is Justice Murray Sinclair, and I'd like you to, I would like you to hear his a comment that he made in response to a question given to him. Thank you, Diane. No sound.
Just get over it and move on. And my answer has always been, why can't you always remember this? Because
you started from the beginning, Diane?
Are you not able to hear?
We weren't able to hear from the beginning, and then when you turn the volume up, then we could hear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Many people have said over the years that I've been involved in the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Why can't you just get over it and move on? And my answer has always been, why can't you always remember this? Because this is about memorializing those people who have been victims of a great wrong. Why don't you tell the United States to get over 9/11? Why don't you tell this country to get over all of the veterans who died in the Second World War instead of honoring them once a year? Why don't you tell your families to stop thinking about all of your ancestors who died? Why don't you turn down and burn down all of those headstones that you put up for all of your friends and relatives over the years? It's because it's important for us to remember. We learn from it. And until people show that they have learned from this, we will never forget. And we should never forget, even once they have learned from it, because this is a part of who we are. It's not just a part of who we are as survivors and children of survivors and relatives of survivors, but as part of who we are as a nation. And this nation must never forget what it once did to its most vulnerable people.
Thank you, Diane. And so we're on to the reconciliation. In June 11th, 2008, Prime Minister Stephen Harper, on behalf of the Government of Canada, delivers a formal apology in the House of Commons to former students, their families, and communities for Canada's role in the operation of residential school. Provincial and territorial apologies follow in the years ahead. On December 15, 2015, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission releases its final report, honoring the truth reconciling for the future. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, who attended the ceremonial release of the report, commits his government to implementing all of the 94 recommendations set out in the June 2015 summer report. 6 years later, 9 have been done. On to the next slide, Diane. Thank you. So what you see in front of you are two different Indigenous ally toolkits. So I'm just going to speak about them next. It's about being an ally. Being an ally is about disrupting oppressive spaces by educating others on the realities and histories of marginalized people. How to be a good ally? Let's begin with land acknowledgement. It is appropriate to provide a land acknowledgement at the beginning of an event or gathering. Those delivering the acknowledgement are encouraged to form deeper connections and grow their knowledge of the original people of the land. To avoid land acknowledgements becoming rote or repetitive and losing significance, acknowledgement should come from a personal place, a solid understanding and appreciation of the land, the language, and the people. Now, step 1. Be critical of any motivations when getting involved in this kind of work. So ask yourself, does my interest derive from the fact that the issue is currently buzzing? Does my interest stem from the fact that the issue will meet quotas or increase chances of any funding? Does my involvement hijack the message and insert my own opinions or values instead of respecting those of the Indigenous communities? Am I doing this to feed my ego? Being involved in any kind of anti-oppression work is about recognizing that every person Every person has a basic right to human dignity, respect, and equal access to resources. Being an ally goes beyond checking actions off a list, and it is not a competition. Being an ally is about a way of being and doing. This means self-reflection, checking in with one's motivations, and debriefing with community members is a continual process. It is a way of life. Start learning, and you're doing that right now. Here, and I have a list of terms that will get you started on educating yourself on the history of Indigenous people on Turtle Island. Educating yourself is an ongoing process. Change will not be easy, and you will never truly be an expert on Indigenous challenges and realities, but you can work in allyship. As you educate yourself, apply your learnings in a meaningful way by asking yourself, how can I use this new information in my everyday life? What steps can I personally take to amplify marginalized voices that are too often silenced? What do I have, and how can that be leveraged? How can I use my position and privileges to listen, shift power dynamics, and take steps towards reconciliation? So a few definitions. Please be aware that these definitions are to give you a general idea. This is especially true when it comes to terminology relating to identity. Identities are complicated, are always evolving, and don't exist in boxes. When in doubt, never assume, ask. Most have heard these terms. First Nations are the descendants of the original inhabitants of Canada. Various nations, beliefs, and languages exist within this group. The Métis are a post-contact Indigenous people. Métis refers to people with roots in the Red River community or other historic Métis communities, while Métis refers to people with mixed Indigenous ancestry. Inuit is the term for Indigenous peoples from Arctic North regions of Canada, Greenland, and Alaska. Inuit is the plural form, but Inuk is the singular form. Turtle Island. This is the name given to North America by some Indigenous peoples such as the Iroquois, Anishinaabe, and other Northeastern nations. The term originates from their various creation stories. Indigenous and First Nation. These are umbrella terms to include First Nations, Métis and Inuit in Canada. Both terms are used internationally to define the original inhabitants of colonized countries. The Indigenous beings, the most favored term. However, it is always respectful to be specific about the nation you are referring to. Use the term they use to self-identify. In Alberta, there are 8 Métis settlements unique to Alberta. None other exist in the world. First Nation in Alberta, there are 50 nations in Alberta and 5 languages spoken, possibly more. The term powwow. Powwow is a traditional First Nations gathering and celebration of dance, song, socializing, and honoring of a rich heritage, not to be used to describe a meeting or a group of people. Step 3, act accordingly. Acknowledge, recognize, respect. The reality, although the Indian Act was enacted in 1876, Indigenous people have only recently begun to obtain the same rights as other people in Canada. The Indian Act still gives absolute power and authority to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs over every aspect of registered status First Nations people on a reserve from birth to death. The Indian Act does not allow registered status First Nations persons to own property on reserves or borrow funds to build a house on reserve. Home titles always remain in the Crown's name. Pan-indigenizing, had to practice that one. A perspective that Indigenous people are one homogeneous group. Indigenous culture is too broad a term, considering the diversity that exists among the many Indigenous communities, nations, languages, cultures, values, and beliefs. Similarly, one Indigenous person does not speak for all Indigenous people. Decolonize, you've heard that term. It means to build a genuine relationship with the community to find their uniqueness and respectfully acknowledge true identities. For example, Blackfoot, Cree, Dene, Stoney, Nakota, Sioux. Create knowledge systems that center the true, often untold history that we all share. Then make efforts to embed this knowledge within your circle of family, friends, and workplaces. Some of you already know. Colonialism and racism has ended. Unfortunately, this is a myth. Indigenous people in Canada continue to face discrimination, not only from an individual perspective, but through many systems in society. Indigenous people are disproportionately represented when it comes to incarceration, unemployment rates, low education attainment, and overall poor health and well-being. False stereotypes perpetuate many barriers to reconciliation. Such stereotypes continue to foster systemic policies that prevent the incorporation of Indigenous paradigm and cultural ways to inform our work. For example, the act of smudge, ceremonies, and other oral practices. To help, encourage your workplace to hire Indigenous people to be involved in the creation and ownership of initiatives that are about and for them. Pass the mic to Indigenous people at events, meetings, and in making decisions that affect them. Respect cultural protocols and tradition, for example, tobacco, smudge. Consider incorporating them in your personal or professional lives. The do's, listen to the experts. Indigenous peoples are the experts of their own realities and histories. Build relationships based on mutual consent and trust. Research to learn more about history, about the history. Continue to support and act in meaningful ways. This could entail calling others out and holding them accountable when they are displaying oppressive behaviors, because when it comes down to it, being a good ally is about risking your voice to elevate others. Please remember, lastly, Indigenous people are grandparents, parents, children, and siblings. They are doctors, teachers, social workers, entrepreneurs, and artists. They are human beings. Indigenous people are present and thriving in a country that expected them to die off and that continues to enforce structures of oppression today. We are resilient. I'd like you now to take a moment to listen to Justice Murray Sinclair.
Hello, everybody. I'm Murray Sinclair. I'm the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. I want to talk to you for a few minutes about the issue of reconciliation, something which, of course, is very important to us here at the Commission, but also is of interest and importance to a lot of people in Canada. One of the things that we at the Commission have discovered is that it took us a long time to get to this point in terms of the relationship between Aboriginal people in this country. 7 generations of children went through the residential schools. And each of those children who were educated were told that their lives were not as good as the lives of the non-Aboriginal people of this country. They were told that their languages, their cultures were irrelevant. They were told that their people and their ancestors were heathens and pagans and uncivilized and needed to give up that way of life to come to a different way of living. At the same time that that was going on, non-Aboriginal children in the non-Aboriginal school systems of this country were also being told the same thing about Aboriginal people. So as a result, many generations of children, including you and your parents, have been raised to think about things in a different way, in the wrong way, in a way that is negative when it comes to Aboriginal people. And we need to change that. It was the educational system that has contributed to this problem in this country. And it's the educational system we believe is going to help us to get away from this. We need to look at the way that we educate children. We need to look at the way that we educate ourselves. We need to look at what it is that our textbooks say about Aboriginal people. We need to look at what it is that Aboriginal people themselves are allowed to say within the educational system about their own histories. In addition to that, we also believe that what's important when it comes to looking at the way that children are educated is to understand that because it took us so many generations to get to this point, it's going to take us at least a few generations to be able to say that we are making progress. We cannot look for quick and easy solutions because there are none. We need to be able to look at this from the perspective of where do we want to be in 3 or 4 or 5 or 7 generations from now when we talk about the relationship between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal people in this country. And if we can agree on what that relationship needs to look like in the future, then what we need to think about is what can we do today that will contribute to that objective. Reconciliation will be about ensuring that everything that we do today is aimed at that high standard of restoring that balance to that relationship.
Thank you. I'll pass the mic to our amazing core.
I just want to say something before course starts that just so you're aware, we're experiencing a thunderstorm here in High Prairie. So if all of a sudden our screens go blank, just have patience and we'll do our best to tether to our phones and connect that way. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know this one really freaked me out. This big thunderstorm, thunder sound. Good morning or good evening again. My name is Corinne, and I'll be leading you through the resources part of the presentation. So if you could move to the next slide, please, Dan. So it was really difficult to try to select which books to highlight because there's so many awesome books out there. So we kind of did a little bit of both. So here we have some literature resources. If we look at like the early years, you know, we have many wonderful books there that really look at teaching about residential schools in a softer way. You know, a lot of, you know, for the K-2, it's a really tough subject to talk about. So, you know, When We Are Alone are about two sisters at a residential school, and they find time to get together still and bond in their special way. You'll notice to the top left, Phyllis's orange shirt. So I think we might all be familiar with Phyllis Webstad, is the lady that started the Orange Shirt Day. And she initially came out with the book in the middle years called the Orange Shirt Story. However, thankfully, a few years later, she came out with one that was more focused to the K-2, I would say. There's a video here that we're not going to watch. My point of putting this in the resources was it's called The Shishi Echo is the book right on top. But if you guys are looking for resources, and then if you go to YouTube, you can probably find people that have recorded themselves reading some of these stories. And so I wanted to put that as an example, that we have a person reading the Shishi Echo story. Larry Loy is a local, was a local Cree man from our area, and wrote a couple of really good books for the middle years. Fatty Legs is a really great book, used a lot in grade 5 because grade 5 has a very heavy residential school focus. And teen years, we just have some amazing books there. The one called When Jack, we already heard about Chani. And The Marrow Thieves is a really good book for grade 9, 10. So some adult books, Knock on the Door hasn't been mentioned yet, but it is a great go-to book that we've used as a team, and it'll really work on building your foundational knowledge around residential schools and other Indigenous issues, but predominantly residential school. Jamie already pointed out the 21 things you may not know about the Indian Act. Again, highly recommended. To the right, we have 4 different links, and I think it's our intention that you will get this, what you're watching right now, the Google slide presentation, you will get this, so you can go on it yourself and you can check out these links. We have the 108 Indigenous writers to read are like a list of 108 books that are just like amazing books to read. So I think we'll just continue on to the next screen instead of digging deeper into those lists. Yeah, can you go back the slide? Thank you. So this one here, thought it was important to share some of our favorite websites that we use all the time as a team. Again, September 30th is Orange Shirt Day, and it's always really big on our team and in our schools, and we do activities leading up to the day and for the day. So that's Orange Shirt Day is the link to the official site, and that'll be full of information and resources, and I recommend checking that one out. Canada's residential schools, Diane, if you want to go into that one. So that is Google Earth's residential schools. It takes a while to load. That's what I was finding earlier today, Diane, just so you know. Diane's controlling the screen for us. So we're kind of like having to guide her to where we might want her to go. And again, like I said, this one takes a while to load. But here we have Canada's residential schools. It's a really amazing website that Jamie was mentioning to me today. So we made sure we put it in. If you maybe go to the background in history, Diane, you can maybe see what that one. So there you go. So you can pick on like one of the, maybe if you go to one of the pink things, so you can see that it's highlighted. Just maybe click one. So truth and reconciliation, it'll be talking about that. I seen there's other times where you could pick one and would talk about like haircuts, and then I picked one that was talking about, you know, different aspects of residential school. And I know like the physical, yes, physical and sexual abuse. So sections like that. I think if you go down to the bottom right, Diane, you see the little earth and all those little icons. If you were to go to one of those, we could go directly to like the Gruard Residential School and find information on that, Jussard, Slave Lake. So we'll just get out of that because I'm just a little conscious of time here, but you will have all these links. We'll share this Google slide presentation with you. Beyond 94, please go into that one, Dan. So we already heard from Connie. Connie was talking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and, you know, the 94 calls to action. So this site, I love this site. It's one of my favorite ones to recommend to teachers is they're measuring progress. So CBC News checks on the 94 calls to action, and they have them broken down from, you know, 1 to 5, child welfare, all the way you'll see in the middle, it's pretty light, but health, justice, reconciliation. So you can go to education and then scroll down, and then you can see, oh, go back up, down a little, those numbers, I want to get at the flames. There we go. So there, each flame icon to explore the progress made. So you can see that 20 have, gosh, my screen is so light. 20 calls to action have not started. 40 are in progress. Projects proposed. 23 are in progress, and actually 11 are complete. So, and then if you were to press one of the little flames, Diane, on anyone. So if you can click it, it'll show, it'll highlight which one has been complete. Ensure that national sports policies, programs, and initiatives are inclusive of Aboriginal people. So what I really like about this is it's updated. I think if you find your way up, scroll up, Diane, to the very top, you'll notice that it has like a here published and then last updated June 7th, 2021. So that was literally like the other day. So, and it's always like that. Each time I come on, it's been updated. So I really like that they're keeping the 94 calls to action in mind and keeping, you know, the government's promise, taking them to task with through this website, I think. So the more people that know about this and can keep monitoring that progress, I think is a good thing. So we can go back, Dan. Thanks. Empowering the spirit is, if you can go in there, Diane, while I'm talking about it, for sure, is another go-to for us as coaches, and a great resource for building your foundational knowledge. It is filled with so many things, so many pieces of information, not just on residential schools, but across the board of all kinds of Indigenous issues, and conversation guide series. So here we have, like, you know, the Métis in Alberta, Inuit Part 1. You can print these off. So great resource. Empowering the spirit. So you can go back. Indigenous Canada. I already seen people in the chat were mentioning that they have taken that course. So if you're not aware of the course, I believe most of us coaches took it last year as well. And it's an amazing course offered online through University of Alberta. It's the best part is it's free. It is legit free, and there's modules, and again, it'll take you from, you know, pre-contact all the way to, you know, talking about issues like Idle No More and murdered and missing Indigenous women. So the whole spectrum of Indigenous issues. If you're looking to expand your knowledge, I highly recommend that. So I just wanted to point out CBC News and Indigenous and APTN. I thought it was important to include these because those are sites dedicated to current events in the Indigenous world. So CBC News, if you can see, yeah. So right in the highlighted upper, it says Indigenous. So all of those, you can go to there. Excuse me, sorry. And it has articles and archives from all kinds of issues. And we can go back. And we don't need to go into APTN, but that stands for Aboriginal People's Television Network. So if you were to go into there, you could see all the programming that that television network offers. And we can go to the next slide, Dan. So continuing on our last page of resources, we just thought I'd highlight a couple of movies. The two we hear the most about are We Were Children and Indian Horse. Movies, you can seek those out. Those are really good movies that explain the residential schools. And Indian Horse is actually a book. It was a book first. So that's the book that's highlighted next to the movie shot there. And I know Indian Horse, when you're in grade 10, there's like E.W. Pratt last year did Indian Horse, for example. Moving on to, say, television. I mean, I already pointed out APTN, but I don't know, I'm gonna guess that a good number of you hopefully have heard of a series called about First Contact or First Contact. So First Contact is a television series produced by APTN, taking, I believe it's 5 non-Indigenous individuals who have very strong opinions towards Indigenous people. And then the show takes them to various destinations across Canada to expose them to the Indigenous world that we live in Canada. And it really opens maybe a few of their eyes and maybe not a couple of them. So it's a really interesting series. I highly recommend that. Music. So I am a hip fan, tragically hip fan for the past like 30 years or so. So one of my personal heroes is Gord Downie, because Gord Downie was the lead singer of the Tragically Hip, and he's unfortunately passed away. But prior to his death, for the last 3-4 years, he became a really strong Indigenous ally, and he really took to heart the story of Chani Wenjack, who we've already heard of his name, and he wrote like poems that became songs and then became a graphic novel called Secret Path. You can actually just maybe go to that, Diane, for a second. And so there's they're on YouTube. You can find the songs. He has a website called Secret Path, and the Chani Wenjack Foundation as well. And so he's just really highlighting this poor boy's story of running away from a residential school. And you can find the lyrics. And we can go back. Thanks, Diane. So documentaries, if you want to click on that. So I was like, oh, National Film Board of Canada, we definitely have to see what they have to offer. So there are 33 listings for residential schools, all the way from like shorter docs to longer length ones. You'll be able to access this link, and you can go and watch all of these docs, including the We Were Children is here. So thank you. You can go back, Dan. So YouTube, I just put YouTube because honestly, it is a go-to for a lot of people. You just put in the search residential schools in Canada and you can get access to literally thousands of information, old videos and stuff. We won't play it, but the video that's on the left, when you do have an opportunity to watch that, please do. It's a 5-6 minute video explaining intergenerational trauma. It is from the perspective of the Australian Aboriginals, but for those that don't know, they also went through a very similar experience. They had residential schools. So it really talks about intergenerational trauma, and we've used this video in our PD in the past as well. It's a really good video. Moving on, art. The Witness Blanket, that you can go to that, Dan. That is a website dedicated to the Witness Blanket, is a large scale art installation by artist Carrie, I can't remember his name. Yes. And so it was a monument that traveled across Canada to teach about residential schools. Right now, it is at its home, the Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg, but it has over 800 artifacts on the blankets. You'll see, so the picture that was there, it was, I think it's like almost like 10, 12 feet high and 40 feet long, the Witness Blankets. So if you ever hear of it touring Canada again, which I think might be a possibility in light of, some of the questions that that have come up in the last couple of weeks. So you can go back, Diane. So my goal with the, just when we were building and I was building, one last thing. So if you could go into that. So this is the Indigenous corporate training. I know Bob Joseph, I believe, is very heavily involved in this website. He is the one, the author of 21 Things You Need to Know About the Indian Act. And so this website is for anyone who's interested, who is in working effectively with Indigenous peoples. There's training courses on here and books, blogs, videos. I highly recommend this website as well. So we can go back then. I also attached 10 things you can do, Kamloops Indian Residential School, if you want to click that. So that's a current blog that just came out in the past, like June 1st, it's dated. So just giving some things that you can do in response to residential school, the finding out at Kamloops. And possibly, I mean, at this point, we know there will be more mass graves found across Canada, that there's that call to look. And so an article like this might be well worth the read. And you can go back, Dan. So those are the 3 pages of resources that I worked on, and I hope it gives you like a really great information to build. Again, we always use this phrase, but your foundational knowledge on what you can learn. So we'll just go on to our closing. So here, we have time for questions after and some final words, but we did want to share this video with you. It's a little, it's kind of long, but I think it's really worth it. It's really worth it too if you're a parent or a grandparent, a kukum or a musum that is wondering, how do you explain the horror of residential schools to your child? That probably has some questions right now. So Monique Gray Smith is an author. These are on the left, these are books that she's written, and our grade 5 class across the division is reading Lucy and Lola right now as we speak. And she really explains in a really kind, gentle way. And you can just, about residential schools, like how you can talk to them, how you can talk to your child. If you can just play the video, Diane.
My name is Monique Gray Smith, and I'm an author for Our Littlest Citizens and all the way up to Our Not So Little Citizens. And since the news broke on May 27th about the 215 children and the unmarked graves on the residential school in Kamloops, I've been inundated with requests about how do I talk to the kids, both from parents, grandparents, and teachers. So I thought I would do a short video about some pieces that might be helpful to you. I think the place to start is checking yourself. How are you feeling with this? And what do you know about the truth of Canada? There's so many places to expand your learning about the truth of this place we call Canada. So that when you have these conversations and you get some of the difficult questions from your children, you are ready to answer them. And that before you have the conversation, that you feel like you're grounded. And so you might have a child who asks you in the car on the way home, why am I wearing an orange shirt again today? You can say, you know what, after dinner, let's have this talk. You can do it as you go for a walk. If you're in a class, you can ensure the chairs are all in a circle so that everybody can see each other and have equal conversation and equitable conversation. To think about and tell the truth, that for a very long time in this country, there were laws that sent Indigenous children to schools that were far away from their homes. And that in those schools, really bad things happened. And again, your language, depending on the child or the children, will vary. You might say there were really bad things happen. If they're older, or maybe they're, more developed emotionally and intellectually and mentally than their age, you might tell them there were abuses that happened. And you can give them things to read, right? And you can read with them. I think also, if they're ready to have those conversations about why were these laws put in place, that we as Indigenous people were seen as inferior, that we needed to change, that our ways, our culture, our language, our ways of knowing, being, and living and walking in this world were seen as, not held with dignity, not held with respect, seen as needed to be changed. And again, the language you can use if they're older and they understand, you can talk about assimilation. Again, if they're older and they understand, you can talk about genocide and how that actually is what has happened in this country. Some of you have been asking, what can I read? So I'm going to give you authors' names, not necessarily books, because some of these authors have a collection, and not just books, but they're contributing to the wellness of our world in many ways, through podcasts, through movies, through TV. They're the creators. So for children from really, some of them from birth until, late teens, anything by Julie Flett, Christy Jordan Fenton, and the late Uliman, Margaret Pokiak Fenton, Tasha Spillett, Jenny K. Dupree, Cynthia Leidig Smith, Tracy Sorrell, David A. Robertson, Richard Van Camp, and Dallas Hunt are just a few. I also have a few books for our littlest citizens, like My Heart Fills with Happiness. And You Hold Me Up. This book is now available in Anishinaabe in English. And it really is a book about how do we want to be together. You hold me up when you're kind to me, when you respect me, when you play with me, when you listen to me. All those ways of how do we be together. And then when we are kind. This book, illustrated by the beautiful Nicole Neidhart, is really a salve right now, right? Kindness is a salve. Kindness lowers our cortisol, which is the stress hormone, and increases oxytocin and dopamine, which is the love hormone. So if you're looking for some ways to change things, be kind, contribute. If you're able to financially, to your friendship center, to the nation closest to you, have ways to be kind. Also, this beautiful one by Richard Van Camp, We Sang You Home. For older kids, there's Speaking Our Truth. I think, this is marketed for 9 to 16-year-olds. I think it's for 9 to 90-year-olds because so many generations went through both the public school system and sitting at dinner tables and not learning the truth of our history. So that's one resource. This was created last year for the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Every Child Matters for September 30th, Orange Shirt Day. This is available if you just Google Every Child Matters, National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Anything written by Phyllis Jack Webstad. Also older young people and beginning to talk about adults and teens. This beautiful book, Picking Up the Pieces by Carrie Newman and Kirsty Hudson. Also looking at this book, this flip book, Lucy and Lola, and then literally when you flip it over is this beautiful story, When We Play Our Drums, They Sing by Richard Van Camp. Also a few more authors' names for adults and teens, anything by Tanya Talega, whether that be reading material or podcasts. Cherie DeMoline, Louise Erdrich, Michelle Good's book, 5 Little Indians, Helen Knott in My Moccasins, Teresa Mailhot, again, David A. Robertson, Richard Van Camp, Wabugashig Rice, Drew Hayden Taylor, Thomas King, and Richard Wagamis. All of those storytellers and writers have books, short stories, podcasts, ways for us to continue to learn and grow. And they all address not only residential school, but the legislations that have impacted perhaps the wellness of us. I know legislations have profoundly impacted my family as an Ikihoa as a Cree woman, and that the legislations have ripple effects. And one of those ripple effects is our relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And this is one of these times that we can begin to come together. At the closing ceremonies of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Dr. Maria Wilson talked about the children who never came home, who died at residential school. And she's like, can you imagine the utter devastation? Can you imagine? And that's what's happening now. Is parents, grandparents, aunties, and uncles are imagining. And the empathy is coming alive. And that empathy will move us forward. It will create change. We cannot rely on the federal or provincial governments for that change. We've seen that. The change is incumbent upon us as citizens who live in this place we call Canada. And so I invite you to please have these conversations with your children. Have the conversations in the classes. Hold the space. Have the conversations with your friends, with your older relatives. And yes, there will be some who will have the usual responses. Oh, that happened so long ago, blah, blah, blah. But the reality is that we are only beginning this journey to, heal, to understand, to uphold dignity, and to move forward. And every single one of us has a role in that. So I invite you to think about, what is your role? What can you be reading? What can you be listening to? Who can you be having conversations with? So that when the children ask you, and they will, that you're ready to have these conversations. And there will be some of you who your children or your grandchildren or your nieces or your nephews, they will be teaching you. And so a big part of all of this is our humility, to realize that there's lots we don't know and more to be revealed. And so I offer thanksgiving to you for watching this video. May you please, go to your library, get books out, order from your local bookstore, and if you need to, order online. But read. Continue to educate your heart, your mind, and your spirit.
I just think she explains what we've been wondering and asking and questioning so well. And I just want to, before we go to the very last slide, just want to say, like, when she said, the children will be teaching you, and to have that humbleness. I always say that when I'm in our classes, say, especially the grade 5s, I always tell them, you are our allies, we're building you. You guys know more than the generation before you and before them, like, about residential schools. And so I always tell the kids to go, I invite the kids to go home and share what they learned that day with their families. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, hi, Cor. Pretty hard to follow those powerful words from Monique Gray. Thank you for adding that video. I guess at this time, we are pretty much at our limit here, but we definitely want to give everyone opportunities to ask questions. And I did see in the chat, Monica had a question for me.
Sorry, trying to do 2 things at a time. So this is a question back to one comment that you, one part of your presentation, you mentioned there were 11, and I apologize for my accent, treaties on your area. And then thank you for recommending that book, because when I'm an immigrant, so I've been for years trying to educate myself, but I'm feeling that I'm still scratching the surface. So thank you for the recommendation. But within my ignorance on that matter, I feel that those treaties were basically only observed from one side, which is your side. And I feel that they were never, they were agreed on both parts, but only yours was the one that committed to do the things. So you offer and you honored all the offers, but nothing came on your side, more than lies. So my question is very personal. I'm amazed and deeply admire your commitment to reconciliation. And I respect you deeply, but I need to understand, how can you trust again? Is because at the Beyond 94 gave me a little bit more of information about progress. It's maybe because you see more progress now. So my question is about trust. How can you keep trusting? I know that you don't have a choice, but how do you do to keep doing it?
I think the trust is it's like you said, we don't have a choice. We got to try and do our best to follow through and make sure that we're represented. And in the words of, I think it was Chief Dan George, he said we will use their education and we will use it against as a weapon against them. And basically our people are getting educated. We're getting stronger with every generation. We're healing. And I think hiring lawyers and representing ourselves in laws and in court and fighting for, I guess, just things to go the way they should, that hopefully the wool is not pulled over our eyes again as an Indigenous people, I guess. And we do have to have faith, though, that things will move forward, because they can't necessarily stay the same way. And I think the more voices at the table calling for the country to move forward, the more allies that are in support or maybe holding the feet of their government representatives to the fire a little bit, I think the more action that will happen. Because what we do know and what I see is if it's always Indigenous people saying we need to do this, this needs to be acknowledged, sometimes it's easy to ignore. But when the whole country's crying out, saying we need to right these wrongs, then it's a lot harder to ignore. And, you know, as tragic as finding 215 young souls in a mass grave is, I think across the country, when we look at what's happened across the country in response to that, I see a huge movement. I see a country coming together to honor the memory of these little ones. And, you know, as a people, we're still here, we're getting stronger, there's still hope. And you know, every generation's getting prouder and stronger. And, you know, I have our cultures coming back, our ceremonies are coming back, our teachings, our stories are coming back. And it's just so wonderful to see. I probably am more connected with culture and ceremony and things of that nature than my dad was. And I hope, and I truly hope that my children will be even more so connected, that I can start learning these teachings, these cultural knowledge that's being shared present day, and pass that forward. And that all our young people continue to pass that knowledge, learn that knowledge, pass it on, and continue to grow stronger as time goes on. And absolutely resilience, Wendy. Our people, often you hear about trauma and being stored in DNA, right? And that our blood remembers. And as tough as that is to talk about, I think we often forget that resiliency is also stored in our DNA. And our people are strong people from coast to coast. And we're still here, even though all the laws and all the things the country and throughout history has happened to kind of eradicate and beat down the people. We're still here, we're getting stronger. And, you know, the more people we have at the table, the more allies, even, you know, things are going to move so much quicker. And thank you, everyone, for being here tonight to spend some time and share hold some space with us to talk and learn and discuss. And if there's any other questions, please feel free to let us know. I definitely won't leave anyone hanging. I will stick around here as long as I can. Thank you.
It's me again. I like to talk, and it's kind of scary because sort of feeling a little at a loss for words. I feeling overwhelmed, feeling disgusted, and you know, when you said like the last school closed in '96, and like others, I was thinking, of course, you know, they ended so long ago, right? And my youngest child was born in '96, and so I had kids going to school before that, you know, because my oldest was born in '88, and then myself going to school, and I'm thinking, how in God's green earth was this information? Like, I'm sorry, I'm just in shock. My daughter, who is 24, is probably one of your biggest allies. She's, I think, going to dedicate her life to trying to see changes on your behalf, and I sure applaud her for that. Even in her own family, she struggles with trying to get her own siblings and father to listen to her, and I think that's really unfortunate. But you know, I attended, am I right in saying a healing circle? Is that right? Where we sat around in a circle? yeah, I was helping a woman that is struggling from addiction and whatever. Anyway, the point was that I attended one of these healing circles that I'd never been to before. Amazingly powerful. Like everybody was in tears. Like it was phenomenal. And I experience things like that. I listen to yourselves. And I think, how can the rest of the world not see that this is just almost like an amazing way of living? And I don't know. Anyway, but my question is more of an unfortunate one. When you look at those that are struggling from intergenerational trauma and how their response to, or the cope rather, not their response, has been, abuse, alcohol, drugs. How do we, I'm not saying you have the answers to this, but I was saying to my daughter, like, I would love to sit down with any one of you, and I have sat down with a couple of Indigenous folks and had these open conversations to educate myself. And I'm great with that. But what do we do with those that are struggling, that, like I'm in Edmonton, so I'm downtown Edmonton and I encounter someone with serious mental health issues, someone's experiencing homelessness, they're perhaps high at the time that I encounter them. And to be quite honest, I'm scared. Like, I don't know how to approach them. I don't know what to say. So then I'm going to turn my back on them, not because I want to turn my back on them, but I don't know what to do in those cases. So when I see people like yourselves, I've no issue. Let's sit down and talk for hours. Like, I'm good with that, but I don't know what are we supposed to do or should be do, or do we leave that to the experts? But then I worry that they're not getting anywhere, not because they're not trying, but because they don't have whatever supports they need to help these folks. I don't know. I'm probably spinning in words here, and I apologize for that. I just feel like I'd like to cry. That's how I'm feeling.
Oh, thank you, Nancy. I think that's a tough question, right? How do we move those people forward who are struggling with mental health, loss, grief, trauma? And to make I guess it's not easy, right? And my suggestions would be to start connecting them to the land, get them out of these concrete buildings we build, right? These hard streets that we walk on, sidewalks, right? Get them into the land, let them connect with Mother Nature. And that's probably the best starting place. And then, connecting with resources in your community, such as Native Friendship Centers or elders, or right directly with Indigenous communities, and maybe making those connections for that person to those people so that they may start to connect with culture. And those are very good starting places. And I believe once you start to connect with the land and start to learn and attend ceremony and connections with elders, that healing already begins and is already on the path it needs to. And then I find one of the last steps for healing is about forgiveness, right? And forgiveness is different than forgetting. Forgiveness is about acknowledging what happened and not letting that control you or affect you any longer. And that's the real power in healing, is that forgiveness piece. Because if you don't forgive, every time you remember something that happened to you, that trauma, you're triggered again and you're angered, and you're never going to truly heal until that forgiveness piece is there and you can move forward.
And I applaud you for being able, sorry, my dog is possessed. Like the thing I worry about with my daughter, that, in her education, I worry that she is so, and this may not be the right word, so I apologize, but like caught up and obsessed with all these inequalities in the world, and particularly as it relates to Indigenous, and even more specifically with women. And even myself, like I feel like overwhelmed, like I want to go do something nice after this, and I think I don't deserve to go and do something nice. So how I'm worried about her and even others who may be hesitant to get involved and to truly learn, right? Because it is overwhelming. And I'm worried that she she can't enjoy any happiness because she's just obsessed with these horrors that happened and are continuing to happen. So how do you know, try and balance that somehow, you know? I don't know. I'm dominating here and I apologize. I just feel overwhelmed.
Absolutely. I can understand why somebody can get lost in that. And, you know, to Nancy, if somebody put some work forward and one person is affected, whatever work you put in was worth it.
Mm-hmm.
And is that enough? That's enough. And if you want to go further than that, excuse me, absolutely carry the work further. There's never going to be a shortage of work, however, and we can't do it alone. That's why we need to just have as many people that are willing to step up. And, you know, sometimes it's scary. Well, it's always scary when you're starting this kind of work, I guess. You know, and it's uncomfortable. But without being uncomfortable, we don't grow. We don't evolve. Mm-hmm. And we need to start having these uncomfortable conversations to move forward. Otherwise, we're always going to be stuck back there.
I think you guys have educated her, because these are the exact words she says to me all the time. You have to have the uncomfortable conversations. You have to, you know, face what yeah, pretty impressed. And just while I'm here, just say thank you so much for all of this. And I do hope that I see you're recorded and we're going to get it shared. So hopefully we can share this with others in our family and friend circle, because pretty important. This is great. And I appreciate all you've done.
Sounds like your daughter has a really great mom.
Tried to instill goodness her. I think I instilled it a little bit too far, maybe.
All right, anybody else?
Leslie?
Yes, I was just listening and listening to how she was struggling with what to do. You know, where do I start? And I probably speak for a lot of teachers that are probably on here right now. And I guess you just have to start with where your strengths are. So I know for myself as a teacher, I feel I have a responsibility, grade 6 teacher especially, to share it with my students. And I'm on here tonight because I want to make sure that I'm sharing it properly and the truth. And finding, like Corinne, those resources were amazing. So I'm hoping that I can access the recording, because I'm definitely going to be tapping into all of that. And, you know, shout out to my FMNI teacher at my school who's in charge of providing us with resources and stuff. And she's the one that gave me the information about the meeting tonight. So that's where I'm going to start, is make sure that I'm passing on your story truthfully. So I really enjoyed it tonight. Thank you very much, you guys.
You're welcome. Thank you for sharing. And, you know, those years of grade 4, grade 5, and grade 6 in education right now, the current curriculum in social studies is a perfect place. And there's so many openings to connect teachings and understanding around history, around the treaty, the Métis, the Inuit, and all these things, the history of life in Alberta, history of life, the stories of Canada. And there's just so many easy connections to make. And I think just doing our best to, one, educate ourselves and then move that work forward, like you said, in a truthful way. I think sometimes it's easy to sugarcoat things, thinking grade 4s, grade 5s, or grade 6 can handle these truths. And speaking from experience, they absolutely can handle those truths. And they're going to amaze you at the questions they have. And they're going to amaze you at their viewpoints they have when they say that was not right. This is unjust. Why? And please be truthful within reason, right? You don't want to talk too much or delve too deeply into some of the abuses or the things that went on with that age group, but absolutely be truthful, and they will let you know what they can handle through their questions they're asking. Hi.
Okay, I'll ask a question. What does that actually mean? What does hi actually mean?
Hi is I guess it's used as almost a thank you, or in I guess in English almost as an amen, or
Okay.
it's just that expression of gratitude, I guess. So we use that in the ending of prayers for the most part, right? So it's
I've heard it so much, but I've always been embarrassed to ask what exactly it means. I respect it, but I don't know what it means. So thank you for that.
Yeah, so off the top of my head, I don't know the exact translation, but that's the way it's used most often, is that expression of gratitude, whether thanking somebody for a gift or for sharing, or thanking Creator for prayers you asked for. Hi.
Thanks.
I'm not sure if there's any other questions out there. Cora has attached in the last slide contact information for the team, so that'll come into a team email, and we can answer or address anything that you have after this session if things are if you guys have questions. But I know our goal, and we talked about this, was making sure that we created safe space for good conversation. And I think that's happened tonight. I'm really happy that we had such a large group. There was some really good sharing. And I think it's carrying on with those conversations, having the truth, and having comfortable conversations. And I think that's what we need to do to move forward. And when you hear things that are being spoken that you know are wrong, to be brave and bold and stand up. And that's how we all move forward together, I think. So I'm not sure if anybody else has any final words, or I know we have really exceeded our time, but we did have lots of things to share with you all. So
Absolutely.
Why did you folks do this in the first place, and will you be doing more like this? Again, sorry for the dog. I'll mute.
We actually take care of all of the professional development for our school division, and we take a lot of pride in the development of what we take into our schools. And as we were building this and developing this, we started having those conversations where, man, we really should be taking some of these things to the community. These shouldn't just be held for our teachers. So yeah, you never know. Maybe we'll come together and put some more awareness evenings out there.
I'm probably going to sound like a robot because my internet's wonderful. Let's just put it that way. But I just wanted to thank you and the team. This was actually really eye-opening. I'm sad to say, but growing up, I never learned about any of this when I was in school, even all the way through high school. I only found out about the residential schools as an adult. And so I was very curious about what information I could learn tonight. And I must say it was very eye-opening, so I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Marcus. And thank you everyone for the comments. We didn't want to dig too deeply into some of the harder subjects, just because through this virtual platform, there's no way to ensure people who are attending are able to, that we can support those people through those times, right? Because some of this stuff is triggering, and to hear some of those hard truths. So we just kind of skim the surface and give you the opportunities and the tools to expand your knowledge on your own and dig a little deeper. Yeah, and it's been a wonderful evening. I'm honored to have this opportunity to share with all of you and to hold this space. I think it was a conversation that has been needed to happen for a long time, and I'm grateful for all of you who attended tonight. Hi, thank you. And I know, I know from holding these sort of events, we've held some storytelling teaching sessions. I also sit on the High Prairie Aboriginal Interagency, and through that we host storytelling sessions and teachings throughout our area. And this always happens at the end of a session. Like everyone just wants to stay connected. Nobody wants to leave. We just kind of want to hang out. And it's hard to kind of just say goodbye. Hey, that's it. We're out of here. So I guess before things start getting too uncomfortable and we just sit here smiling at each other, thank you everyone once again for attending. We will definitely get those, the recording and resources out to you guys, and yeah, keep having those conversations, have them with as many people as you can lure into a conversation, and yeah, let's move this forward. Thank you.
Forgot about telling them about the storytelling, Jamie, on the 22nd.
Oh, actually, good point, Wendy. We, as the High Prairie Aboriginal Interagency, we have been utilizing Dr. Kevin Lewis to share storytelling sessions pretty much that have been targeted for the community. I think we've done 3 sessions to date through that winter storytelling season. And then the last one was at the beginning of April. We did, however, book him for another session for June 21st. And that session is going to take place during the day. And on behalf, High Prairie Aboriginal Interagency is paying his honorarium to make access free. So any classrooms that want to sign up and log into his storytelling session, his topic is going to be tying right to Mother Earth. So, and if any of you have sat in on those other storytelling sessions with Dr. Kevin Lewis, you don't want to miss this one. If you got classes, you bring your kiddos to listen and learn. He's an amazing storyteller, and I'm just kind of excited for that teaching coming up.
June
Thanks
22nd. June 22nd, right? Okay. Yeah, it's
I'd
June
like to make
22nd.
I'd like to make a suggestion, and that has to core a gentle way to, and this I think is on your resources on by the books. There is that poem that was written. Can we end with that?
Mm-hmm.
Diane, if you can share your screen, because I don't have access to it. So it's the page that it's introducing the resources. Thank you, Connie. And I just wanted to end by just acknowledging that, you know, my cookum went to residential school, and I think Jamie and Connie, so we're all intergenerational survivors here speaking, and it was an honor. I know my cookum would be proud of the work that I'm doing in my school.
For sure. Absolutely.
So this is a story, a poem written in the last week or two. So when they buried the children, what they didn't know, they were lovingly embraced by the land, held and cradled in a mother's heart. The trees wept for them. With the wind, they sang mourning songs their mothers didn't know to sing. Bending branches to touch the earth around them. The Creator cried for them, the tears falling like rain. Mother Earth held them until they could be found. Now our voices sing the morning songs with the trees, the wind, sacred fire, ensure that they are never forgotten as we sing justice. Abigail Echo Hawk. Thanks, everyone.